All right, let's face it, you're not going to live forever, so plan for it. Private wealth advisor Saul Simon from Lincoln Advisors joins us today with some insight on estate planning. Thanks for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about what estate planning actually is.
I would say simply that estate planning is the disposition of assets to who you want, when you want, in the manner that you want. And what we need to do is pick an executor or an executrix, a man or a woman, to help administer what your wishes are. And what is most important is communicating what your desires are, sometimes very often not only in the legal document, but also with family members, so that everybody understands who does what, how they're going to do what, and what they're going to get.
And who gets what.
That's right.
And if you don't do that, what happens?
Well, there's all sorts of fighting and miscommunications going on. And very often from experience, I guess I'll share that assets pass on three ways. And the first way assets pass on is through title. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that your assets are owned properly. So if I own a house, joint rights of survivorship, that goes to my spouse. The second way assets pass on is through contract law. Anything that names a beneficiary, like life insurance or an IRA, names a beneficiary, including a 401k plan. That's contractual. The last way assets pass on is through my last will and testament. And very often, if you think about it, most of my assets, 90% of my assets, are owned through either title or through contractual obligation. And lastly, in my last will and testament, there's very little assets that pass through the funnel of my estate using my will document.
Now, and looking at some documentation you gave to us, there are three forms that people need to have.
Absolutely. A will. The second is a power of attorney, so that someone can make decisions on my behalf if I'm not able to make decisions, either while I'm competent, or there's a provision that says a doctor needs to clarify and communicate that I am unable to make these decisions. And then I get to choose someone, usually a spouse or a sibling, to make decisions on my behalf. And then lastly, a living will, a healthcare proxy, which you must have when you enter a facility, a hospital. You're signing this documentation to give the system an understanding as to what is it you want. Do I need medications? Do I want food? How do I want to end my life? And I want to follow your instructions. The last thing you want to do is have your child look at you or your spouse look at you and say, Mom, Dad, what is it you wanted for me to do for you? So communication is very, very clear in the planning as we get older. I'll also say that from a planning perspective, from a financial planning perspective, up until the end of this year, there's tremendous planning opportunities under the current tax law that allows people to not only make a gift annually of $13,000 per recipient beneficiary.
And that's tax-free?
That's tax-free. In addition, I can give away $5 million if I have that type of asset to a trust, for the benefit of my children. And all that disposition, that gift, is also tax-free.
Or you can give it to somebody like me if you like me enough.
That's exactly right. I don't have to just give it to my family. I can give it to...
But that raises some interesting things. If you have family members that maybe you're estranged, and you have somebody, a next-door neighbor who you really like, you can choose to do that, but if you don't do it in writing, then you've got conflict.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what you wanted me to do for you, and we need to communicate what it is that I want to have happen upon my passing. And the truth is, communication and organization of my financial assets, along with maybe I have an antique car, maybe I have a coin collection, and I want to pass it on to maybe one of my nephews or maybe a cousin who happens to have this interest that we shared together, that maybe he or she would get value from and want to carry that tradition on.
Now, you know, we've seen this played out in Hollywood movies where the guy's got three sons and he dies and they all three end up battling over the assets. If you have a will or any of these documents that says this is what I want to do, can one of your kids come back and challenge that?
Well, people could do anything, and that's why there's the legal system, and unfortunately people hire attorneys to do certain things by claiming maybe someone coerced someone at the very end of someone's life to make certain decisions that were not in his or her intentions. But I just think, as I reiterate to all clients and people, it's imperative to have this kind of conversation with your loved ones, with your family early on. I'll also say one more thing. There's something called a living trust, and trusts are very common to everyone today.
You don't have to be wealthy to take advantage of
No, you don't have to be wealthy. Everybody has a trust, as I mentioned, with an IRA account. An IRA account is a trust. But this type of trust, called a living trust, allows for privacy, allows for confidentiality. If I die in Essex County with a will, someone can go to Essex County and look at the system documents as to what is it I had and who got what.
Right.
A living trust shows confidentiality and privacy. Ronald Reagan had this type of documentation, and no one knew what was happening in his life. And specifically, if I own real estate outside of the state of New Jersey, say I have assets in an asset in New York, or even Florida specifically, that's where expenses start to really add up by not having a living trust in place and having the real estate owned in the living trust for the benefit of my beneficiaries. Because then what has to happen is the asset gets probated in New Jersey, as an example, and then because I own that piece of real estate outside in, say, New York or Florida, the family needs to hire an attorney. And now they have to probate that asset, and it becomes more costly. So by having a living trust own various assets, it creates confidentiality, privacy, and it reduces overall estate administrative expenses.
Great stuff. Always good to have you in. We'll look forward to having to talk more about this subject.
Super.
Next time.
Thanks for having me.